During the Middle Ages, bitter rivalries and warring between families and factions dominated everyday life. With the gradual onset of great periods of peace, families began to turn their attention to building outside the city walls. For nearly 1,000 years, artisans had worked for a pittance under the direction of city guilds or the church. Both had rules to obey that more than often stifled creativity. They were skilled technicians, thinkers, discoverers and inventors who in the main went unrecognised. In the early years of the 15th century, they decided to change their own destiny. At first, it was only a few who sought to use their talents to advance their own agenda. Subsequently, over the next century, they called themselves artists and began stamping their wares with a system of symbols, or if they were able to write, they signed them. Then the expanding bourgeoisie or middle classes sought to acquire them as status symbols, and change was inevitable. Humanism was essentially a rejection of religious dogma in favour of a belief in the advancement of humanity through inquiry. This idea emerged in Italy, slowly gathering momentum and spreading throughout the noble houses and courts of Europe. In Italy during the 14th century, a citizen had been reticent about displaying his wealth in a dangerous and uncertain world. By the 15th century, however, providing visual demonstration of your wealth became a key to social dominance. For nearly 60 years, the Medici were the benevolent rulers at the heart of progress. Cosimo the Elder, 1389 to 1464, founded the dynasty, but his grandson Lorenzo the Magnificent, 1449 to 1492, was destined to become its most famous celebrity. The outlook that he brought to Florence was liberating and emboldening. He made the city a leading cultural and political centre in Italy, and Florence's fortunes flourished. Lorenzo encouraged and supported young up-and-coming artists, architects, painters, goldsmiths and sculptors. At Rome, a new style in architecture confirmed the power of the Catholic Church, with its use of grand manner, giant classical order and a central dome above a huge central room. Artist, architect and all-round genius Michelangelo, 1475 to 1564, took up the opportunities that were presented to him and created the new classic style we now know as Baroque, as he remodelled parts of Vatican City for the popes. An accomplished musician and an ideal feminist in England, Elizabeth I, 1533 to 1603, used her personal magnetism to full effect. Throughout her reign, imagery played an essential role in presenting Elizabeth to her subjects at home, her immediate court circle, and the wider world. Emperor Wanli, last ruler of the Ming dynasty of China, was sitting on the throne of heaven between 1573 and 1620 when Elizabeth I was contending with Mary Queen of Scots and other thorny issues. The earliest written record of Ming porcelain in the West is pieces specified in Queen Elizabeth I's will, so we can deduce from that they were highly prized. From the very first time the West accessed porcelain wares, it was entirely seduced by them. Queen Elizabeth I and her confidant, the Earl of Walsingham, were financial backers for Sir Francis Drake's circumnavigation of the world in 1577. Drake camped on the coast of California, and a quantity of Ming Period porcelain shards, which are now in the Metropolitan Museum of New York, were excavated from the very spot. It was during the Ming period an entrepreneurial business class grew up in China, and there's a very real idea that the current world economic system we have grew out of the West's fascination with the East and wanting to access her luxury goods: silks, spices, teas, porcelain, silver and superb carved lacquer. In France, Henry IV the Great Henry of Navarre, 1589 to 1610, rode into Paris claiming the throne. He triumphed over his enemies by converting from being a Protestant to being a Roman Catholic. His great public works included a revolutionary property development with retail premises at ground floor level and houses above. He was assassinated, and the Place de Vogues, originally meant for weavers and workers, became a fashionable haunt of the haute bourgeoisie or upper middle classes. They believed the fabulous new premises were far too grand for ordinary working people. In France, the Baroque style was understood and used effectively by Maria de Medici, the king's widow, who became regent of France. At the Luxembourg Palace, architect Salomon de Brossy used its elements of progression and recession to grand effect. At this time, the Marquise de Rambouillet moved from Rome to Paris with her French ambassadorial husband. In her influential salon, she imposed rules for acceptable social behaviour. Her ideas became an accepted standard for etiquette, gradually spreading to most major European courts and centres through the influence of the haute bourgeoisie, or upper middle class. Louis XIV, the Sun King, 1643 to 1715, was impressed with the architectural style used to build the Château Vaux-la-Vicomte, owned by Nicolas Fouquet, his superintendent of finance. He seconded Fouquet's dream team, architect Louis Lavaux, designer Charles Lebrun, and gardener extraordinaire André Lenort, to work on remodelling his father's hunting lodge. It lay nearby the town of Versailles. Designed in the Baroque style, its grand manner and stunning hall of mirrors reflected Louis's belief in his divine right to rule. During the 17th century, the Dutch were struggling to retain their strict Calvinist principles of puritanical restraint. They wanted to provide a visual symbol to others of their moral superiority. Eventually, however, they succumbed to flights of fancy and French fashionable taste through the influence of French designer Daniel Marot. He provided the architecture, interiors and gardens of the summer palace of Het Lauw for William of Orange and his wife Mary. When they left to become king and queen in England, he went with them, having a profound effect on the future evolution of art, design and style. By the 18th century in Europe and England, harmony and proportion in all branches of the arts was a passionate pursuit. Serious archaeological expeditions to assemble celebrated collections of antiques and art occupied many years on a grand tour. Educated gentlemen of means wanted to aid the advance of the study of classical art, architecture, music and science, and they formed many clubs and societies to do so. The new Whig government placed George of Hanover on the throne of England in 1714, establishing a wealthy rule of taste. They used an ancient Greek democratic model to further reduce the monarch's powers and give more power to Parliament. They patronised the arts, design and craftsmanship, and they used it most successfully to reflect the status of their families within the community. In so doing, they determined a high standard of quality by which all others in the future would be judged. English grand tourists went abroad in droves, although they were forced to forego Paris during the French Revolution. They were busy examining the archaeological remains being revealed at excavations going on at Pompeii and Herculaneum in Italy after 1748. This meant re-evaluating styles and layouts of houses as those still intact from antiquity were revealed. An explosion of public interest meant antique views were painted, prints made, books published, influencing professional and amateur antiquarians, architects and builders. Following the expedition of France's heroic revolutionary tyrant, the Emperor Napoleon on the Nile, architecture, interiors, furniture, furnishing, and the arts in all their forms were touched and influenced by design elements and styles from many other cultures. The building of the first iron bridge at Coalbrookdale in England during the last decade of the 18th century heralded the beginning of the industrial age. Massive change was wrought as overnight towns sprang up as the invention of the locomotive opened up the countryside. Enormous wealth was amassed as England and America's economies expanded, making it possible for a member of the lower classes to rapidly move up the economic and social scale. The nouveau riche, or new rich, sought to emulate those they saw as their betters in order to make themselves appear well established. By the end of the 19th century, another re-evaluation was appealing to many who were seeking a way out of industrial ugliness. Social activist, painter, architect and designer extraordinaire William Morris had a vision of an ideal society, one in which everyone would share and respect quality of design and craftsmanship. Ironically, in the end, it was only the wealthy that could afford to support him or purchase his quality furnishings in the arts and crafts style. In the late 19th and early 20th century, the economic and social forces underpinning mid-Victorian stability were shattered. Britain's manufacturing power was threatened by rivals America, Germany and Japan, and at home by industrial unrest. Growing feminist, socialist and political movements characterised this period as one of general and protracted crisis. Modernism is a collective term for the diverse range of architectural and decorative styles, as well as applied and graphic arts created between 1880 and 1940. Emerging out of France into Europe, it also had English, Australian and American phases. Art Deco 1920 to 1940 borrowed from virtually all the design styles of the past in order to fashion the future. It was the most successful of modernism styles, reaching the apex of its popularity between two global conflicts, World War I and World War II. In America, Art Deco was celebrated in New York by the construction of the Chrysler Building, 1928 to 30. It was the direct expression of that will to power which lies behind free, competitive enterprise. It was art, as against those who consciously worked for the undoing of art, and its one purpose was enjoyment. During the 60s and 70s, the aftershock of two world wars established a real fear of the traditional past. This generated a desire to eradicate the old and quickly bring in the new. However, since the 1980s, tradition has once again begun to be seen as something not to be feared, but rather valued, restored and conserved. The Culture Concept Circle course uses the reflective power of art, design and style to assist in opening up inquiry into a deeper understanding and appreciation of the evolution of world cultures. It seeks to help raise visual literacy and can be a starting point for those coming new to the arts or assist those wishing to draw the different threads of art and design history together. Understanding past experiences assisted our ancestors to find creative solutions to the challenges they faced. In the future, we will have to negotiate a modern world with brains that evolved in hunter-gatherer societies. As renowned American-born anthropologist Margaret Mead, 1901 to 1978, observed, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Knowledge of the past will help create the future. We may never get to the end of the journey, but far from being discouraged, we should be sure that what we contribute adds to the joy and glory of the climb. Join us, and the world will never look quite the same again."